And so it caused me to reflect a lot on why as I got older. And I really love and am truly inspired by the work of all of our educators and leaders who are working in schools to support our kids. And I'm an avid animal lover and Eagles fan. I don't know if there's any other Eagles fans out there today, but that is my team. So that's just a little bit I wanted to share about me. So before we get started, I am going to need your help because I would like to hear from you. This is a little bit difficult over Zoom, but before we get started, I would like to take a moment and have you think and reflect about what you remember about your experiences with learning to read in school. So what comes to mind when you think of your earliest memories in elementary school with either learning sounds or learning to read letters or individual words or sentences, or it could even be a memory of one of your teachers reading a story to you. So just take a moment and and kind of think of a few either words or phrases that reflect your experiences. So how do you remember feeling? What experiences did you have in your classrooms? What memories do you hold until today? So is there someone that could share that out for me? Any thoughts come to mind?
Working. Is it working? Oh, okay, it is working. So I think it was like in second grade when I was gonna read some sort of French picture book with words in it, and after I was done reading the book, the teacher asked me a question. And when I got the question wrong, she said I didn't read the book, but I did read the book. So I just developed a hate for reading after that. I never wanted to read after reading that book.
And so it didn't make you feel great, right? Didn't give you a lot of confidence.
No, it did not give me confidence in
Right.
reading at all.
Awesome.
It,
Yes. Go ahead. Okay, so that's an experience that you definitely held on to, just not having a lot of confidence and automatically giving you a negative view of reading. Awesome. Anybody else want to share any experiences or even just a couple words or phrases that kind of stand out to you when you think about learning to read as in elementary school or some of your first experiences?
So I remember in kindergarten, we were learning phonetics and how to start recognizing sight words and whatnot. And I remember our teacher used stations and games to help us like learn this and memorize those sight words. So I remember there was a lot of like helping out your peers and peers helping you. And I think having that ability to kind of figure it out and also to make it fun made it a lot more easier to learn how to read.
So that was kind of a positive experience for you. And I heard you say collaboration, like working together and fun. Awesome. So that was a few of your experiences. I know my experiences were not wonderful all the time. I had a lot of experiences of just really small reading groups and not really a lot of collaboration. And so those were kind of some experiences and having to memorize. I remember having to memorize a lot of things that I didn't necessarily know. I just had a good memory sometimes. So those were some of my experiences. So when we think about the kids that you will work with over the summer or thinking about what you want kids who are in elementary school to think about moving forward, I think we definitely want them to feel positive and, have confidence, right? And find it enjoyable or fun. And definitely those experiences are going to create later on experiences. Well, thank you all for sharing out. So today, during our time together, we're just going to share a little bit around the science of reading. I'm not sure if you've heard of that term. It's been around a little bit now. And we're going to talk about some research-based strategies to support our striving readers, not just for reading text, but also comprehending grade level text, and also share some ideas and details around how to support students while they are reading to us or while you are reading to them. Again, just thinking about our overall objectives for today are really around building your understanding of what the science of reading is and the research behind how students learn to read, and identify some strategies to use when you are working with students. And then as we walk through the next 30 minutes together, I want you to think about how this learning really connects to these guiding questions around what is skilled reading and why does it even matter, right? And how can you provide that in the moment support when you're working with a student that you're reading with that's aligned to research-based best practices? So we're going to just kind of dig into the why behind the science of reading and like, why is that important? So we're going to start by reflecting on this quote by Senator Laura Sturgeon. And in the quote, she says that reading is such a fundamental part of living well. The adverse experiences that students who can't read on level experience throughout life just compound on one another. If you're not literate or if you struggle to read, it's very difficult to participate in society. It's difficult to get a good job. It's difficult to participate in democracy. So as Senator Sturgeon shared, being able to read is truly fundamental. And when students experience difficulties in school, that can definitely transfer into creating struggles in life. And it can also create many inequities. And overall, the inability to read definitely impacts many areas of our students' lives. And in fact, studies have shown that readers who are not yet able to read on grade level can be more likely to report feeling sad or lonely, or maybe even angry, anxious, or depressed. They can have difficulty keeping up in other subject areas. They can be more likely to display negative behaviors, drop out of school, or even end up in the criminal justice system. So creating proficient readers really goes beyond just reading the text. We really want to build what's called a positive identity for students as readers, students who see themselves as capable, because this impacts their life way beyond school. So really today, just thinking about how can we help to ensure that the students that we are working with over the summer are set up to experience all the joys and opportunities of skilled reading. And when you're working with students, it's really our responsibility to show them, and some of them may have not experienced much joy in reading, that they can learn how to be a skilled reader. So when we think about literacy and when we think about equity and strong grade level support and instruction, and how that really translates into practice in the classroom, we really have these guiding principles or shifts that I'm just going to share with you today. And they really are around complexity. So that really just means ensuring that all students have regular practice with what we would call rich and complex text. And evidence, which means ensuring that students have multiple opportunities to practice reading and writing and thinking and speaking, and opportunities to find and use evidence from text. And hopefully you've had some of those experiences as well. And then knowledge, which really means ensuring that students have access, again, to that rich nonfiction text to build their knowledge of the world. So just taking a moment and looking at those three shifts here, think about where you may have already even seen some of these shifts taking place within your classroom in school or within the text that you're reading. So hopefully you're seeing some of these things show up in your text. And then the fourth shift is really all about creating a strong foundation for readers. So it's about what's called a systematic approach to foundational skills. And that includes things like print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics, and word recognition and fluency. And we're going to hone in on that for just a moment. But again, it's really just about providing students with the foundation that allows them to really be supported and understand and comprehend. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about the why. So we've talked about the why. We're going to move into the what. What is the science of reading? So we're going to do a little bit of a small experiment to deepen our understanding of skilled reading. And we're going to engage in 2 mini experiments beginning with this one. The purpose of this activity is really to have you put yourself in the position of being a developing reader. So I want you to take a look at this passage. And I want you to look at some of the code, which I'm calling the code, which is the vowels or the vowel patterns are removed. So as you can see, when you don't have access to all of the code when you're reading, it can definitely interfere with your ability to process and read the words on the page. So just take a minute, take a look at that and see if you can read that. So many of you are likely proficient readers and you probably could read that passage, but put yourself in the position of someone who is just figuring out the sounds of individual letters or someone who's still developing in their reading. And that task would be really challenging, right? So without that, you would not be able to see this. So how about that? Were you able to read it with the code removed? Okay. I'm guessing that it provided some challenges. All right, we're going to look at another small reading passage. And I would like for you to try and take a look at it. So here it is. I want you to try and read this to yourself. So here, all the code is there, right? Nothing is removed. But can you understand the meaning? Is there somebody there that could look at that, read that passage, and tell me what it's about?
How about a volunteer, guys?
We have a volunteer?
Got a hand? They're thinking.
Anybody?
Oh, a hand? I got a hand.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
England's openers labored 34 ball before scoring their first boundary as Strauss cracked 2 4s through the leg side. Cook made a patient start before motoring past his skipper. Okay.
Awesome. So now you can read all those words, right? You just read them beautifully. What is that about?
It's kind of broken. It's not really complete, I guess you can say. Like, there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, and you have the skills to do what's called decode those words, right? You just read every single word. But what you don't have is the background or the vocabulary. So you likely could decode the passage, but without having the background and understand the vocabulary knowledge, you wouldn't know that this is about cricket, which is a sport in England, right? So you see how this really just kind of, this was just, thank you for participating. I appreciate it. This is just an activity to say, hey, reading is super complex. You have to have a lot of things. It does not come natural, right? This is why we have to work so hard with our youngest learners to help support them in reading. So this definition, again, just illustrates how complex it is. And so when we talk about the science of reading, it really refers to practices proven over time by extensive research to help us understand how children learn how to read. And we're going to talk just really briefly about 2 frameworks just to give you some background of like what you just experienced around those 2 texts. So this is called the simple view of reading. And this is research that was created back in 1986. But it really helps you understand what components need to be involved in you being able to read effectively, not just to read the words, but to understand what you're reading. And if one of these pieces is missing, then it causes a breakdown, right? So we know that you're not reading teachers. but it's important for you as you work with students that you understand how they learn to read in order to identify where there could be a breakdown and have some tools and strategies in your pocket to help support them. And again, because we know reading is not a natural process, it means that we have to be very explicit in how we teach it. So this model, again, is called the simple view of reading, and it reads like a multiplication problem. The number of words that a student can decode or read, which is called decoding, multiplied by their language comprehension equals the product of reading comprehension. And like any multiplication problem, if one of the factors is 0, so if you have 0 times this, what is this going to equal? It's going to equal 0, right? Because in a multiplication problem, anything times 0 equals 0. So in other words, if decoding or language comprehension skills are missing, then it can cause difficulty with reading comprehension, just like we experienced with those two passages. The other framework that we're just going to touch on briefly is called Scarborough's rope. And this really is just a visual model to show you how many skills are actually involved with reading. So you have all of these skills around language comprehension and all of these skills around word recognition. And it's like a rope, right? The stronger each of these strands is, the better we are at skilled reading. So keeping all that in mind, and knowing what students need to become skilled readers and become able to translate all of this knowledge of reading into practice, it's definitely complex. Reading is not a simple thing. So then we're going to talk just a little bit about what are foundational reading skills, right? So we know that the ultimate goal of reading is comprehension. It's not just to read the words on the page, but you do need to be able to decode and read those words on the page, right? So foundational skills are not the end goal, but they definitely are a prerequisite to being able to understand complex text. So we're going to just dive a little bit deeper into these word recognition skills that you'll likely see some students that may be just developing that you're working with. So the 4 foundational skills are around print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and fluency. The first one is around print concepts, and it's probably unlikely that you'll be teaching direct print concepts during your role this summer, but it's helpful to know what this term refers to and have a few strategies in your back pocket around this. So the best illustration of print concepts in action is, have you ever been out somewhere with a young child, like a toddler or a preschool child, and they know when they walk up to a stop sign, they say stop, right? They can recognize that it's a stop sign without being able to decode that word. So that child is actually demonstrating the earliest form of print concepts, which is recognizing environmental print. So all this means that it just refers to understanding that the purpose of written language is to convey meaning. And that really breaks down into understanding like how to handle a book. What are the features of print? That a book has a cover, a title, an author, an illustrator, that words convey ideas, and that words that we say aloud can be written down. And even things like there's a capital letter at the beginning of the sentence and an ending punctuation at the end of a sentence. So some of the things that you can, if you are working with a student that is really still developing in their print concepts, some things you can do are just point out, hey, this is the front and back cover. This is the title of the book, and there's an author who writes it and an illustrator who drew all the pictures. You can point to track words as you're reading because that's really helpful. And you can also point out the use of capital letters at the beginning, and there's this punctuation at the end, and then really model, when you're reading, stopping and taking a breath at the end of each sentence, and that helps really them understand the concept of how a story works, or change your voice based on punctuation. Then going into phonological awareness is really all about sounds. So when you're reading with students, and some students may not be able to like fully decode a word or sound it out, it's helpful to be very clear in how you pronounce sounds and words so that they can hear different, what they're called phonemes or sounds in words. And that will help them understand how to clearly articulate them when they're reading. Then we have something called phonics and word recognition. And those are just some definitions, but really phonics is just all about connecting letters with sounds. And again, remembering that equation is a multiplication. So the product of reading comprehension, again, really relies on being able to decode words and understand what you're reading. So both of these factors are super important in comprehension. I just wanted to share it with you too. So when you think about research-based phonics instruction and what does that look like, right? So how do kids learn how to read? You can see on the screen that 3 out of the 4 elements that are needed to be included. And you might also think about, how is this similar or different from the way you were taught to read? And so when students are trying to understand and really learn patterns, it's really important for them to hear a sound. So like in this example, it's O says ooh, right? So for them to hear the sound, for them to say it, for them to read it in the context of a word like spoon, moon, or food, and to read it in the context of sentences. And also to write them down, right? So those are some activities that can be done with students who are really learning how to spell and sound out words. So that would be considered like a research-based phonics lesson, right? We also have this other strategy that is not a research-based approach to reading instruction, which is called 3-cueing, which does not support students. So 3-cueing how it works is that you kind of give students a cue in helping them understand, like through semantic or meaning making, like asking, does it make sense? Or asking, does it sound right? Or looking at a picture and say, well, what does it look right? And so while readers do use cues to understand what they're reading, the problem occurs if they start looking off of the word that they're trying to read and get cues from other things that actually teaches them to guess versus to actually read. And so when we are trying to help kids when they're reading and they're really still trying to focus on letters and sounds, it's important to just focus on the letter and the sound that it makes. And I just shared this example because this is a very old school book. But if you look at the last sentence, it says, Sam will run and jump in the pond. But if a student doesn't know what that word pond is and they're trying to read it, and they are taught to, oh, look at the picture and guess what that word is. There's a lot of other words that they could come up with that's not pond, right? They could come up with lake or stream or water or pool, right? But none of those words are the right word. So it's really important that we focus on helping them look at the letter and say the sound, and that will really help them when they are trying to read alone or when they're trying to read in school. The last skill we're going to talk about today is around fluency, and I just included this because fluency, when you think about being a fluent reader, it's really like a bridge between all of that decoding and saying sounds and words and comprehension. And so I just included, there's like 3 main things around fluency, which is how accurate you are and you're able to, read very quickly and accurately, your rate of reading, and your expression. Many of you do this without even thinking about it, right? But if you're a developing reader, you don't know to raise your voice and like your tone when you're reading a question, or use expression when you come to a sentence that has a exclamation to it, right? So those are all the parts of fluency. And then these are just some things to look out for. So sometimes if students are struggling with or they're still developing in fluency, it can kind of look like slow and labored, or they're having difficulty sounding out words, or they might need to go back and repeat the beginning of words. Or maybe they're reading very robotically and they're not pausing. So those are some things that you can look out for to know if a student is really struggling with that. And when you think about how can you help kids who might be having some trouble with fluency, here are some different strategies that you could try. You can try modeling. So when you're reading aloud to students, you can really model, like, what is it like to be expressive and fluent while you're reading, and tracking text as you're reading. You can try having the student reread the same passage or sentence and give them some feedback, and like some really positive feedback around, hey, I like the way that you continue to try, right? Because we want to build their confidence. You can practice something called choral reading, which is when you practice reading together at the same time. So the student has you as a model. Or you can practice something called partner reading, where you take turns reading a text aloud to each other, and again, giving positive feedback. So these are all things that would kind of boost someone's confidence and help them along, right, as a support while they're trying to be a more fluent reader. So for the last part of today, I just wanted to add a toolbox, right, of research-based strategies and some tips of things that you want to do and you don't want to do, right, when you're reading with a student, because our students are probably in all different places of them learning where they are in reading. So what would you do when you're thinking about, if I'm reading with a student and I have a student who's stumbling or skipping over a word, they're probably struggling with that decoding or at the word level. So things that you might not want to do is to guess the word, right? Because that goes back to looking at a picture and just really trying to guess the word based on the picture or the sentence, or skipping over the word, or giving them the word, because you do want to try and build that confidence. But things that you do want to do are work with them to help them sound it out. Or if it's a word that has multiple syllables, help them break up the syllables. Or they can even tap out the sounds they hear to help them decode the word. Or even direct them to look at the letters and say, well, what sound does this make? So those are all strategies that are going to be really helpful to support a student who might still be struggling or developing at that level. One more thing is, well, what do you do if a student's having trouble understanding what they read, right? So let's say you have a student who read that cricket passage, but they can read all the words, they just don't understand what it means. Some things that you don't want to do is to give them a lower level summary, because again, we want to build their confidence with that text, or orally summarize the text for that student. Again, working with them through choral reading, or just really thinking about, well, can they read the words on the page, and then let's talk about what is it about. You wouldn't want to swap out more difficult words for easier words in the text, or give them the answers, right? But you would want to have the student read the text out loud to you, or prompt them to reread, or maybe it's just a word in a sentence they don't know the meaning of. And just think about ways that maybe you have background knowledge on something that they're reading about and how you can help them. And the last one is, what do you do if you have a student who can read the words, but they're reading like a robot, or maybe they are not fluent in their reading? Well, you don't want to read the text for the student and then move on. You don't want to think, well, they can read the text, so they must understand it, right? Again, thinking of that cricket passage. And definitely don't want to encourage the student to read faster, because we know rate is a huge part of reading. And if you read faster, a lot of times you're going to miss the whole meaning. But what you can do is model reading fluently with expression, practice those repeated readings, and choral reading with the student at the same time. Or something that's also helpful is called echo reading, where you read a sentence and they read it after you, because you're the model for them. So those are just some strategies that I included that might be helpful, as well as I'm going to include, I have in the event that anybody is interested in learning more, or just digging a little bit more deeper into this, we have a ton of resources available that I'm going to leave with you along with the slide deck. That you can take a look at and see what's available in Delaware, but also outside of Delaware as far as national resources. So that was a lot today. I do want to thank you guys for, listening. And I am so excited that you'll have an opportunity this summer to work with kids that, hey, they're getting their first experiences with reading. But I do want to thank everyone for your attention today.
Thank you, Paige.
Thank you.
I don't know if you could hear the applause, but they clapped.
Well, good. I hope that, and like I said, I left my contact information. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. But I'm so excited for your opportunity this summer.
Thank you. All right, fellows. I see a number of you getting antsy and you are ready to go home, and I hear you and I feel you, but we do have some things we have to do to finish and wrap up the day. First thing we need to do is make sure that our spaces are clean